Hi, good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum and welcome to this morning's breakfast at UMHealth. Apologies for the slight delay. Anyway, we only have one presentation today. My name is Sherina. I'm the Deputy Chair of the UMHealth Medical Research Ethics Committee. Being part of Universiti Malaya, you all know that research is such an integral and important part of our daily lives. And most of us are already very much familiar with the research process. And we know that there's so many components to research, be it the study design, trying to get collaborators, trying to get staffing, and most importantly, trying to get funding. Now, the topic for this morning, who pays for your research, actually comes about from our own MREC's experience in processing the many research ethics application that we get. You know that we do get a fair amount of application. And some of the questions that, if you were an applicant, some of the questions that you will need to respond to would be who funds the research, what is the amount, and most importantly is what would the participants be getting, or would they be getting any honorarium or any sort of reimbursement for their time? And also whether the researchers themselves will be paid for out of the research fund. Now, all these have to be declared. It is certainly not up to us to decide, whether it is appropriate or not. But then the idea is that we do have to keep all the stakeholders' interests at heart. So it is very timely, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two speakers this morning. We have Dr. Alex Phang, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Pathology in Faculty of Medicine. Alex is also the manager of the UMMC's MREC. And we have Ms. Grazele Jenarun, who is our Assistant Secretary of the Medical Research and Ethics Committee. These two members are part of the Secretariat of MREC. We have three other members of the Secretariat, namely Rose, Titi, as well as Izani. So without much further delay, I welcome Dr. Alex, to present, and as well as Grazele. They have different parts, and we do have quite a bit of time for this because it's only one presentation. And of course, we welcome comments and questions at the end of it. You can either write in the chat box or, Okay, so Alex, without much further ado.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sherina. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. All right. Okay, maybe I will just mute not mute myself, but I will just stop the video so I can see clearly the presentation here over the PPT. Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you are doing well and keep safe as always. All right. So today we are very delighted to be able to talk about this topic, who is paying for your research, that we believe it will benefit many researchers in the field, especially from FOM and also UMMC. All right, so I think I may say that it is quite common that there are quite substantial expenses involved in research setting, even though sometimes just purchasing the consumables like the stationery, hiring a research assistant, and also we need to pay them the salary and also study insurance, for example. And also some of the study also we need to prepare the honorarium for the participants. All right. However, we notice most of this financial planning might miss out the reimbursement or the compensation for the inconvenience, especially for those studies that require some multiple study visits, and also some study that require longer duration for participation. And also researcher may not able to notice there will be some hidden costs incurred. What I actually mean here for the hidden cost is like some costs that will be incurred because some of these research activities may take some time off from those research participants because they need to go for the study visit, and in some scenario, they may need to spend longer time, and also probably they also need to travel quite frequent to the study site just because they would like to be part of the study. And in some cases also, I think this standard care, which is also part of the research protocols, is still quite vague for some researchers that are not sure whether this should be part of the standard care, that the research participants are still paying for that service. All right, so hence we can imagine this research is not just only impact on us as a researchers, but it is also crucial for us to understand those issues that involving among the participants lah. So today I would like to share among these ethical dilemmas that we always encountered as the standpoint for, as a MRIC that we always encountered, that maybe we can share with you. So whether the participants should be compensated for their time and efforts spent for research, and what if they are coming for their routine care? So I'm sure this is a question that always puzzle a lot of our researchers here. And also the other ethical aspect that we're looking into that is that whether should they out of pocket for the research related procedures, or the procedure cost should be borne by the researchers or maybe the institution. And also in some unfunded studies, let's say the student project at most of the time. So whether it is fair for the researcher themselves to provide the compensation from their own pockets. And last but not least, also whether the researchers conducting research activities, whether they should be compensated because they spend extra time and efforts for this research activity as well. All right, so before I start off deep dive the topic today, please allow me to spend a few minutes just to go through with you quite a few important fundamental principles of research ethics. And I believe these principles will serve as the important guiding rule, not only for the ethics committee, but also from the perspective of researchers, especially for those who really passion and also really want to make sure they are conducting the ethical research lah. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is respect for persons. All right, so when talk about respect for persons, we always relate it to informed consent, and also the process of taking the consent lah. So in this context, I personally feel that it is very important and very crucial for you as a researcher to fully convey the message, to convey the precise information to your research subjects or participants before they decide to enter or the research lah, before they decide to give their consent of participation. And I think this is such a great move in upholding their autonomous decision. All right, because they will fully comprehend what are the content, what will happen to them during this duration when they participate in the study. All right, so like for instance, I think if the study involves several follow-ups, for example, so that you already plan with your team, that you will get the participants here for the study visits for a few times. So I think you have the obligation to inform them explicitly that probably the compensation for inconvenience will be provided in the incremental manner, rather than just paying off them only when they fulfill all the sessions that they will be needed to attend. All right. So and also this is also to avoid the undue influence towards their decision making process. As I think it is also very important that compensation should not be used as a tool to entice them to enter, to the research. And I think this is very important that we always advise the researcher not to, to publish compensation in their advertisement, and because we worry that it may end up that people coming for the research because of this compensation, or maybe some sort of monetary reward, or maybe some in kind of compensation, I would say. All right, so next one is about the beneficiation. So as for the beneficiation, basically we know all research potentially will help us to generate useful knowledge, and to come up with new things that basically will improve the health quality and also people life. So this is, I believe this is the objective that many researchers doing research. However, I think such research may not be applicable immediately, and it would not be immediate effect to the participants. So hence, we always advise that compensation should not be seen as a benefit, as it is, because if you put it as a benefit, it may cause such undue influence. Again, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about the principles of respect for persons, so it may cause the persons, to participate because of the compensation. All right. So we do not see the compensation as a part of benefit, but we want to emphasize here is that the compensation is to compensate for their inconvenience, because the time and also the efforts they spend to participate in the research. And besides that, we also need to be aware that the research shouldn't burden both the participants and also the researchers yourself. And therefore, I'm talking about non-maleficence here, which means that no harm to any persons within the research enterprise. So hence, I think these two things should also always be avoided in many research settings. And the first one is that there shouldn't be any out-of-pocket to pay for the research procedures by the research participants. And secondly, is that same goes for the researcher. There shouldn't be any out-of-pocket from the researcher to pay the compensation. All right. And last but not least, when talking about the principle of justice, we need to realize that the amount of the compensation should match with the prudence or the efforts required in the research setting. So we think it is very important that we need to make sure it is fairly distributed among all levels of individuals. All right, especially some studies that may involve disadvantaged population. So in one case, I think we encountered that in one arm, the researcher recruited the B40 population as the research subjects, and also they recruit the researcher, the healthcare worker as the participant as well. So the researcher is going to conduct the focus group discussion. And in this scenario, we noticed that probably the the healthcare worker getting a higher rate of compensation for inconvenience, whereas the B40 population who are willingly to participate in the focus group discussion getting lower rate of compensation. So I mean, it is the same amount of work. It is exactly the same amount of efforts being given by both parties, but it would be quite injustice that because of different populations and getting different health rate. So I think we need to be very clear with that and to ensure that the research team decide this really fair, adequate, and also appropriate amount of compensation. And besides that, also we also need to make sure that the appropriate compensation for the research team that being engaged in the system, like for example, the study coordinator, the research assistants, and all that, they are getting the adequate and also appropriate amount of compensation for the work that they do. All right. So I think later on, Ms. Grazele will talk about it in details. And with that, probably I would like to invite Ms. Grazele to pursue further on the topic today based on these guiding principles that I briefly go through just now. All right. So over to you, Grazele.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you for sharing the basic principles in guiding us to plan for our compensation for the research participants. And thank you to Prof. Sherina earlier for the introduction. My role today is I'll be talking about a few subtopics, which are the researchers' responsibilities and where the funding should come from, as well as how much is adequate compensation for research participants. And after that, we will have case scenarios, a few case scenarios that we will go through together, which I hope that everyone in the audience can support us by participating and maybe share your thoughts in the chat box later on. So firstly, I'll be talking about researchers' responsibility. So it is very important to know that efficient planning for research is key. And this is important because during this phase, the planning of research, to plan out the budget carefully and as detailed as possible, especially to think about the compensation, to think about the study, your study design as well, and to see if your study requires a lot of follow-up visits or a lot of assessments. Please try to estimate the costs required for the compensation and for each visits. You may discuss the appropriateness of the compensation with us as well. And at AMREC, you may call us anytime. This is to avoid last minute decision for compensation or trying to figure out the source of funding later when you're already about to start your research. And then it is the researcher's responsibility also to secure funds needed for the conduct of the study. And that's why planning is important again, because researchers should allocate time to prepare for the grant proposal writing and to prepare a detailed budgeting for your research. And then next, it is also the researcher's responsibility to ensure that the compensation type and amount is appropriate and fair for the research participants. Next slide, please. Thank you. So where should the funding come from? It can either be internally or externally. For example, internally, we can try to apply for university grants, or maybe you can talk to your departments and see if there is a departmental research fund or a postgraduate research funding. And for external, there could be private entities or also the government sectors, such as MOSTI and cancer groups, or in the private entities can be the pharmaceutical companies or the sponsors. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the most how to say burning question is, how much is adequate? So in this case, researchers should consider the appropriateness and the type of the compensation based on a few factors, such as the duration of the study and how long the participants are involved in the study, and how many types of assessments or questionnaires or any other research related procedures that they have to go through, and the distance, if the the research participants are required to come to the study site for the follow-up visits, and how far is the research participants are staying and from the study site, and the frequency of the follow-up visits, how many times would the research participants would be required to come back to the study site for the study visits. And the amount of the compensation should cover the inconvenience and the additional costs that that are incurred to the participants, because there are costs related to the travel and the time that the research participants are allocating just for participating in this study. And we also have to ensure that the amount of the compensation does not cause undue influence or cause different motivation. The compensation should not motivate the research participants to join the study just because the amount is attractive. The amount of the compensation is attractive, and this may lead to undue influence or even coercion for the research participants. And before we go into the the case scenarios, maybe I can also share the amount that the UMMCM REC amount of compensation that we have discussed and consider it to be as our reference, the standard reference for compensation. For industry-sponsored research, our guiding reference for the compensation would be 150 ringgit for participants residing inside within Klang Valley, and 250 ringgit for those residing outside of Klang Valley. And we have discussed it in detail already. This amount acts as a reference, and it covers the costs, return costs, the grab cost, the participants' time, the amount, the hours spent in the study site to be assessed for the study, and it even covers their meals, all the hidden costs that maybe we may not necessarily or often realize that they go through. Even the amount, the time spent for them to travel to the hospital, for example, that some of them may be stuck in the jam, and that time spent is also their effort and the inconvenience. So that's why we decided that this amount would be appropriate for the compensation for the research participants. As for the investigator-initiated studies, it really depends on the type of the study and the burden in terms of the weight of the assessment or to the patients, and whether the patients are required to come from travel from afar, and as long as it covers their time spent and the return trip for them to come to the study site. We will now go into the case scenario. So for these case scenarios, I will sort of bring us through for case 1 and case 2, and Alex will guide us through case scenario 3. And we appreciate if you can comment in the chat box your thoughts and your answers for each of the case scenarios. For case scenario 2 later, there will be a poll, just a heads up, and you can select your answers through the poll later. So I will now start with case scenario 1. This study recruits healthy individuals to investigate the prevalence of obesity and to conduct genetic testing to find out the factors associated with their obesity. Patients are asked to come to the hospital, and researchers compensates them 15 ringgit. Do you think that this compensation is appropriate? You may share your thoughts in the chat box. We'll give a few seconds, about 30 seconds, for everyone to type in their answers.
So I echo Grazele. In case you would like to add in your comments or what you think about the amount or anything related to compensation, please share.
Do you think, okay, the answers are coming in.
So one person says that I think it is fine. Another person says that amount is not enough to cover the transportation costs and inconvenience of patients. I think it's Prof. Rosmawati thinks it should be 30 ringgit, double the amount that was actually suggested. So it's like bidding, how much you give the participants. So Prof. Saja asked, what else do the participants get apart from financial reimbursement? So that's a good point. Sometimes they can get things in kind. Okay, so that's sorry, my bad. I forgot about transportation. So that's another thing to add on. So Dr. Sham's comment was that amount only covers follow-up fees. First visit is 30 ringgit. Mm-hmm. So there you go. You have the one that we have not actually touched about, the consultation and the visits. It's 30 ringgit. Some may give the excuse that their participants are government pensioners, so it's free. It doesn't matter. But then don't forget that we have the taxpayers' money who are actually paying for the registration fee. So that's a big issue. Perhaps either Ms. Grazele or Dr. Phang can touch on later. So someone suggested maybe RM 50 ringgit. Okay, so interestingly, a Grab driver may not want to join, considering the loss of time working and have to pay for parking. I'm not going to touch into how much parking costs anywhere, but there you go, parking and travel costs, plus pay per hour equivalent as well. Yeah, so I think that's probably Prof. Chan. It depends. Then again, you remember what I think it was Alex touched on, that you should be equal. So whose equivalent pay are we going for? Maybe someone who works at a fast food restaurant may get paid X number of amount per hour, but you may have someone else who gets paid much more. So how do you decide on a level playing field? So I think that's enough for now. Thank you so much for your participation. So Grazele, maybe you can take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Sherina. Thank you everyone for your answers. And yes, here in this scenario, we really have to think, we have to consider, is 15 ringgit sufficient? And there are a lot of other factors that could be affected from this scenario, such as like how long will the participants be involved in the study, how many hours, like Prof. Saja just now say, if the participant would have to spend 2 to 3 hours. That's already a lot of kerugian, or they would be a bit disadvantaged in getting income from somewhere else. And with that in mind also, how much effort, what is the weight of the study procedures to the research participants, and whether it also depends, because this scenario is a bit vague and we didn't put in a lot of details in this, but it also depends on whether the participants are called specifically to come for the study, or whether these participants are approached from for example, like from the hospital lobby, from the public. And again, that's true. With this, I think someone shared that this RM 15 ring, this 15 ringgit may not even cover one trip of the patient. And I think in this scenario, this would really disadvantage the participant, because they would already have to pay also for their clinic fees, and a lot of costs that they have to pay for. And I think it is appropriate to compensate them a little bit more, or maybe around 50 ringgit or above. But we also have to be aware that we may also cause undue influence if we compensate them too much. For example, 150 ringgit or 200 ringgit. So this one, we really have to think about the appropriateness of the compensation, just enough to compensate them for their time and their effort and the inconvenience. I think that's it for case scenario 1.
Hang on, I take note there's a few comments there, but we'll revisit this a bit later, but we'll go on to case scenario 2.
Okay, thank you. The next case scenario, the title of the study is The Effectiveness of a Diet Consultation Program for Patients with Hypertension. Participants will go through the same program as patients who are not part of the study, and the diet consultation is part of the clinical service that the patients require. There are multiple visits as part of the program. There are 8 weekly sessions, and each session has a 5 ringgit consultation fee. So the questions are, should research participants be compensated for travel and inconvenience? And who should pay the 5 ringgit consultation fee? Should it be the research participants or the researchers? For this case, we have Paul. Please do, I think the Zoom moderator will share the poll, and please select your answers.
Yeah, so this requires the participant to come for multiple visits, and each time you come, you have to pay 5 ringgit as part of the registration fee in the hospital. So the question is, when the person is part of the research program, who should pay for the 5 ringgit consultation fee? Please feel free to choose either your answer would be research participant or the researcher. So Grazele, would you say the participants would need to be part of this program because it's part of their care, or is it because they're invited simply merely to join the research? Would it make a difference?
Yes, that would make a difference.
Mhm.
If they are purposely selected to join the research because they fit in the criteria, the eligibility of the research, and they probably in the first place they would not need to go through for the program if it was not for the research. So it has a different these two different cases will have different compensation. Yeah. Shall we share? Shall we wait for the
Yeah.
whole results?
Okay, so so we have 52 people who responded. Thank you very much. The majority, which is about 77%, said the researcher should pay the 5 ringgit for having the participant come each time. It's 5 ringgit to the hospital. The researcher should pay. Now, about a quarter, 23%, feel that the research participant should pay. So that's interesting. You know, when they come, it's part of a program, they're going to benefit from it. Well, we do not know yet the effectiveness of it, but hopefully they will learn something. So perhaps that's the idea behind having the research participants pay. Okay, so we have someone commented that this person participated in the poll for free. Well, thank you very much. We're not going to give you, entice you with anything for answering the poll. So we'll keep that in mind. Perhaps, Grazele, any comments, or would you like to go on to case scenario number 3?
Yes. So for case scenario 2, thank you again for your participation, and it's very interesting. And yes, in such cases, we really have to think about what difference does your research make to the existing program, and is your research going to involve additional visits or additional questionnaires, additional assessments, or additional blood taking? Really have to consider that, because if it's something additional to routine or standard care, you may need to compensate them for the inconvenience, probably for holding them up in the study. Maybe in the usual clinic visit, it will only take them an hour, but in this, because there is an additional questionnaire or assessment for your study, you require them to stay for 2 to 3 hours, then we should not disadvantage or cause inconvenience to the research participants. So we should at least give them compensation for their time and their effort. And this is really important, which for this particular case, it is acceptable for the participants to pay for their consultation fee if these participants are only recruited because they are already part of the program, and that there are no additional procedures or questionnaires that may cause them inconvenience. So, but again, we will try to, if we can, we'll try to compensate for their the effort that they give because they joined the study. Yes, I think that's it for case scenario 2.
Thanks, Grazele.
I'll now pass to Alex for case scenario 3.
Thank you so much, Grazele. And I think it is getting warm up already. Everyone is involving in the discussion, and also, I would say, ethical. Sometimes when it comes to ethics, we will get different kind of arguments and opinions. So I think there's no absolute right or wrong, but it is something that worth to discuss, and also case by case basis, I would say. And same goes to the case scenario that we are going to discuss today as well. There's no absolute correct answer for this, but it is something that worth for us to ponder and think about, like what should we do when we encounter such a situation. All right. So I would like to share the next case, case scenario 3. So in this case, the patients need to do a chest X-ray. Sorry, I have to close my screen. Okay, the patients need to do a chest X-ray as a part of the standard investigation in the research protocol. So the charge for the X-ray is 20 ringgit, and this is a master's research project. So first, again, I would like to hear from you all. Maybe you can just type your answer in the chat box. So whether in this case, the research participant should be compensated for travel and inconvenience. All right. So Yeah, so this is the question. So maybe everyone, you can just share your answer there. All right, we are getting answers. Okay, so
I think so far it's people saying they should not pay for the chest X-ray.
yeah.
So if the patients are not having to pay, then it should be the researcher.
Yeah, so far we get the answer. Most of you said yes, the participants should be compensated for inconvenience. And 2 is that the patients should not pay for the X-ray.
Alex, can I challenge you?
Sure. Prof. Sherina, yes.
If this X-ray is part of their standard care, they need to do it anyway. So that is one situation. But the patient is already in the clinic. He or she doesn't really need this chest X-ray, but because of part of the research, he or she needs to do this chest X-ray. So those are the two situations. That's probably very different. Yeah. So who pays the 20 ringgit? The X-ray is not going to help the patient directly. It's going to help the researcher. Yeah. But the patient is already there as part of a follow-up visit.
Yeah.
Okay? So most of the responses that we are getting is that no, it's not standard care, patients should not pay. But he's already there. So transport is not an issue. By the way, let's send him for an X-ray. He's a pensioner, doesn't have to pay, it's free.
Yeah, exactly.
You're supposed to give me an answer.
Yeah. I think the possible resolution to this case scenario, like I think what has been highlighted by Prof. Sherina, I think if the patients come for this X-ray examination and as a part of their clinical routine, I think it is fair for them to pay the fee. So we may say it is quite opportunistic for the researcher to gather such data for their research, and this is quite similar in retrospective study in which I think the researchers are looking for like data from the medical records and all that. So however, I think again to your questions, if let's say this chest X-ray has not if let's say this chest X-ray has not been done because it is part of the research protocol, meaning that the patients wouldn't be required to perform such examination, then in this case, I think the researcher should compensate for inconvenience for the participants. Yeah.
So it goes back to what you have in the protocol.
Yeah, exactly.
It goes back to the earlier slide that said it's all part of planning.
Yeah, it is like because they enter to this because it is part of the research protocol, then I think yes, it is considered that you're recruiting the participants into your research. Then I think the answer is yes. Okay, so let me see the answers. Yeah, basically I think we are getting quite a lot of answer here. Yeah, maybe we can pass back the floor to Prof. Sherina because I think there are some questions here. Yeah.
Do you have any more slides, Alex?
Sorry?
Do you have any more slides?
No, I think this is... Oh yeah, sorry. So before we end, before we end and we go to the Q&A, so I think it's very important, just a few bring back home key message lah. So the first one is that I think as I highlight just now about the ethical principles, the 4 ethical principles that I mentioned just now: respect for persons, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So we think this is a very important guiding rules, and it's a key in the provision of the fair compensation for the research participants. And also from the stand of MREC, also we think it is very important that research should be planned appropriately. And also the researcher need to think ahead and to think about all these financial budget, especially for the compensation for inconvenience where it is necessary, that it should be considered as part of the budgetary plan. And also, it is not recommended for the researchers to provide such a compensation to the research participants out of their own pocket. And last but not least, all efforts should be made to prevent coercion or undue influence in providing compensation for either research participants or researchers.
Right. So thank you very much. We have we've got a few interesting comments here. There was one comment that said that talking about compensation, why not have volunteers? Volunteers are more welcome rather than having people come in for a visit. So when you have a volunteer, then you don't have to give them compensation because they're volunteering. Any comments on that?
Yeah, it's okay. Grazele, you go ahead first. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, it really depends on what are you trying to answer for your research question, because certain it may not fit within your inclusion or exclusion criteria. The participants, if you get them from public or volunteers from public space, and certain study target population have very specific inclusion and exclusion criteria that you would need to adhere to in order to make very good results from your research study that can answer your research question. I think that's my opinion. Certain cases we're not able to just recruit from the public because they have very specific target population. Thank you. Alex, would you like to add on?
Again, I think you have answered that what I thought, that whether if you just recruiting the volunteer, so it could answer that questions, like maybe the researcher is going to investigate some conditions or diseases, so they might really need to get into all these patients populations, and therefore I think it might be quite challenging for them to get those participants from the public domains. And therefore, I think it is really need to look into the whole design of the study, and also whether it could be able to answer the research questions. And another alternative I was thinking is maybe like for some study, since you already planned your study, like maybe some of the study, maybe you could get from the data retrospectively, and as long as it could answer your research questions. So probably that would be another alternative that maybe you can think of. Yeah, because I think I might not say it's a very, very appropriate way, but I think it could be opportunistic again, and I think there's already existing data available for the researcher to analyze, and yeah, I'm not sure whether Prof. Sherina would like to give some input about this. Yeah.
Rather than giving input now, because I think that's the issue about volunteerism and participation. There are also some comments is the compensation applicable to medication, whereby we give anyway, just that the selection of different types of brand or biosimilar. So the question is, do we fund the medication cost?
I think I think in many studies, especially the interventional studies that like involving the medicinal products, like clinical trials. So I think giving the medication is already part of the care, and I mean it's already part of the research protocol. Then I think it already shouldn't charge the patient to pay for the medication. So I think what we actually emphasize here today is is that we, from the perspective of MREC, we want to see what exactly the involvement of the participants, right? So what may cause inconvenience to them if they willingly to participate in the research? Just like when you think about yourself and also maybe your family members who are being recruited in the study. All right. So we know the study duration, like maybe the time they spend in the research setting, like in the hospital, maybe is 1 hour. All right. But we need to think of like maybe they need to take their time off from their workplace. They need to travel all the way here. So that should be taken into consideration. And this is actually what we plan to compensate for their inconvenience. So
another quick one is what's your opinion on lucky draw rewards? For example, you answer a questionnaire and you get a chance to win a trip to Langkawi or something.
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting this. Yeah, we have received some research protocols that actually stated to have referrals or lucky draw. All right. So at first, I think it may cause some extent of this undue influence because it may entice the participation. And yes, I think it has been proven that it will improve the recruitment rate, to encourage people to participate in the research. But however, I think also we have to think about whether like the money that you spend to buy for this, lucky draw prize, like for example, one iPad, that amount maybe you can make it as a fairly distributed for everyone that involving in, like, let's say maybe interview, rather than just one person will get it, right? So like that 2,000, maybe you can give each participants 20 ringgit rather than you just give one iPad to that one person. And again, I think sometimes when talk about referrals also, like maybe lucky draw and so we also need to see whether it's matched with our cultures here as well, because some sort of like probability of winning something, so it may against with certain religions belief and the principles there. So we also need to look into that aspect, because it really need to fulfill not just only for the research entities but also the local context, and we really need to see whether this has any relevance to our community as well.
Right, thank you very much. So there's another view that rather than the participants, or with this issue of whether we have controls or you have subjects. So perhaps for those with restricted budget, perhaps control subjects should be the only one who gets the compensation, because the participants would get some benefit perhaps. Yes, Alex, you're making a face and Grazele is trying to look for answers. Any feedback?
Grazele, you want to talk about it? Yeah.
I'm still thinking.
Yeah, maybe I can share my view first.
Yes.
I think this is in line with what I just talked about the principle of justice. So I think if one arm, the control will get compensation. So I think both it should be fairly distributed. That I think it should be equal, that both the intervention group and also the control group should get the compensation. It's not just only one arm. Yeah.
Okay. So Grazele, do you have anything to say, or can I go on?
Yes, I agree with Alex. You can continue. Thank you.
Right. So what Prof. Chang is saying is interesting, because the answer to the rhetoric question in the title of who pays for your research looks like the patient is paying for our research in the hidden costs incurred by them. So it's time that we observe a patient's day once every year, if not every day of the year. So perhaps that is a challenge for us to take perhaps to the next. We have a research patient day. Okay. I'm just going to wrap up because time is coming to an end. Time flies really when you're having fun. It's almost an hour. But essentially what we're trying to say is, if the process or the test or the medication is part of research and it's part of standard care, then by right, the patient should not have to pay. Because it's part of the care that they're getting. We are dealing with human subjects. Do not forget that. We're working in a medical situation. So they need it as part of the clinical care anyway. So the second issue about making sure that it's all fair and level. So you should not really differentiate who your participants are. If one person is getting some compensation, then the others should get it as well. Do not forget the test. Who should pay for this test? I cannot pay for it because I have no funding. I'm a master's student. Yes, we know your issues. We've been there before as well. So it's a matter of planning. If you really cannot get any funding, then perhaps the research design, the research questions should be targeted towards doing a research that requires, well, I won't say zero, but you don't have to pay out some compensation or payment. So that's all the time that we have. There are many comments that's listed in the chat box. I think Alex and Grazele will have a field day today answering them. Hopefully we'll send it back to you. Thank you very much for your participation, and we welcome any more comments. You know how to reach us at UMMC MREC. So thank you very much. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much.